Okay, hope you got your bell work done. We will find out the answer later in the notes, okay? So this is really quick, just overview of some of the things we're going to be talking about during these notes. So don't concern yourself with reading them right now. Just know that these are all incorporated throughout this entire series of notes today, okay? And that's a neat bait ball in a kelp forest. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, so understand why bony fish, that bony fish and cartilaginous fish, we're going to talk about both of those today, are chordates. And we discussed in our last set of notes the protochordates, right? The ones that have just a nerve cord, but not a spinal cord, not a backbone. So now we're moving on from that, okay? But you can see how they're related. All fish, salamander, human, in an embryonic stages, we all have similar traits. We have those notochords, the dorsal neural tube, pharyngeal gill slits, and the post-anal tail that, of course, get reabsorbed and turned into whatever our DNA tells us to turn it into, okay? Now, vertebrates are phylum Chordata. So we're moving up in the hierarchy of more complex organisms, okay? 500 million years ago, very economically important marine organisms, both for food and as pets. They have a backbone, obviously. So I hope you're keeping up with the notes so far, because we're going to be on a kind of fast-paced 30 seconds per slide, so to speak, okay? Or less. Types of fishes. So we're going to start talking about different types of fishes. Fishes is a word. Most abundant vertebrates on the planet, approximately 22,000 species, but we're discovering more all the time. 58% of them are marine. So that means 42% are freshwater. So there's more, obviously there's more saltwater in the world, so there's going to be more species of saltwater fish. Here's the first kind. These are the agnathins. Agnathins are jawless fish. They're the most primitive kind of fish. They have been around since before dinosaurs. This is an ancient fish about 510 million years ago, a jawless fish. And modern day ones, they just have a round muscular mouth with rows of teeth. And here are some other fossil agnathins. So they had some very unique armored plates, armor all along their side. So they've been around for a very long time. And the first one we're going to talk about is the hagfish. They're also called slime eels, and I'll show you why in a moment. There's about 20 species. There's only 2 genuses, Maxine and Eptatretus. They feed mostly on dead matter, dead fish that fall to the bottom, dead or dying fishes. They live in tunnels on the bottom and cold water. So we don't have them here in Florida, but economically they're used for making leather, and eels. You can also get eel skin leather as well, but hagfish these are all hagfish products because of their skin. So they tie themselves into knots, like this guy here, feeding on a fish carcass to get a better grip on the food. And they'll tie themselves in a knot and then rip off the piece of flesh. And this is why they're called slime eels. Check this out. So if you're disturbing one, it will produce a copious amount of mucus from its body. Just boogers, really, okay? As a protective, device against prey when they're alarmed or disturbed. And they actually use them as a cooking ingredient, similar to the whites of eggs. And you can see how it's proteinaceous. It's pretty gross. The second kind of a jawless fish, and the only other kind we're going to talk about in this class, are lampreys. You may have heard stories about people swimming in the Great Lakes and they'll get attacked by a lamprey. I'm not sure if those are true or not, but they do get sucked on the sides of fishes. There's about 30 species of them, and you can see they have these rows of teeth, sucker mouths, no jaws. And these are some sea lampreys attached to fish, and you can see the damage that they do. So they're kind of parasitic, but they just suck in their blood, and some of them feed on just invertebrates. Cartilaginous fishes. So we're moving from the jawless fish to the cartilaginous fish, and then we'll move to the bony fish. So this is class Chondrichthyes. You have to know that word, Chondrichthyes. It's kind of said just like it's spelled, so write that down. And this includes the sharks, the rays, the skates, and something called a ratfish. Chondrichthyes. Say it in your head, okay? Because I'm going to be saying Chondrichthyes from now on instead of cartilaginous fish. So you have to know what a Chondrichthyes is. And of course, why? Because their skeleton is made out of cartilage. Here's a cross-section of a tail from a shark, and this is all, not bone, this is all cartilage. Cartilaginous skull. The only thing that's bone on a shark is its jaw. There you go, okay? They possess all not all cartilaginous, but they possess, sharks do, with those well-developed teeth, right? And their mouth is ventral, meaning it's, excuse me, under their head, rather than at the front of their head, like bony fish. And we'll see a comparison about that in a moment. They have a ventral, because dorsal's the back, ventral's the front, so they have a ventral mouth. They have rough sandpaper-like skin. Many shark attacks aren't necessarily just from the bite, but from the shark bumping up against somebody and rubbing up against them, and it will scrape their skin off. So, because they have these teeth-like scales called denticles. That's why they're called that. Dent refers to teeth, and it's an evolutionary thing. And I'll show you a more microscopic view of those denticles. They look like little teeth. And here's a cross-section of a denticle with, and you have to kind of sketch this really quick into your notes. So take about 10 seconds, just give a quick little sketch of the shape of the denticle, and that's it. Just so you get an idea so you remember that the skin is very much like the teeth. It's an evolutionary trait that developed into the teeth from their skin. So let's talk about sharks specifically. First, there are about 250 species around the world. They range in size from the little 25-centimeter pygmy shark, so that's about the size of a ruler, okay, to your 18-meter, again, that is from here to the other side of the room, longer even actually, to the other side of the room, largest fish in the world, the whale shark. Very harmless creature, filter feeder. Adapted for very fast swimming because they're predators, we know this, and little has changed to these creatures over 100 million years. This is an extinct species called Megalodon in comparison to human size. Here's an ancient shark, what the shark looked like, ancestor. Different kind of teeth. They have a caudal fin. Their tail fin is called the caudal fin. And they come in different shapes, but it's very powerful, and it's used to give them quick bursts of thrust. They're sprinters. They're not long runners or long swimmers for a long distance. They're typically cruise around, but when they have to go fast to attack, they move that caudal fin, and they can move very quickly, okay? They have their dorsal fin here and here. Oftentimes they'll have a fin spine. So that dorsal fin that comes up out of the water, like dun 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 dun, jaws, right? Triangular pectoral fins, 2 of them, 1 on each side, like the pectoral muscles when you're doing weightlifting. That's essentially their arms, but they use those as wings to glide through the water. You're going to be drawing something like this for your last one, or your only one for this unit. It's because we have to know all these parts. So not necessarily the inside but definitely the outside, okay? So we're gonna do an external like this for sharks. Well, I think we're gonna do one for bony fish as well. But you can see there's quite a bit of anatomy. In the past, we used to do shark dissections, but we're just gonna cruise over that really quick. Here's the caudal fin, in the back, and the dorsal fin in the front. And there's a trick, you can measure the distance between those two, and you can tell roughly how big the shark is, okay? Marsh sharks have to swim continuously through the water so that water can pass over their gills. If a shark stops swimming, most species, they will die. They will suffocate. They won't get enough oxygen passing over their gills. So the water goes in the mouth and out through the gills. Some sharks, like nurse sharks, can sit on the bottom, and I'll talk about that later. Their teeth are embedded in a tough fibrous membrane that covers the jaws. A lost or broken tooth is quickly replaced. It's kind of like a conveyor belt of teeth. So the ones that are sticking out here will, when they bite something, will oftentimes fall off, and then new ones will come up like that. Like a conveyor belt. Pretty wild. They're found in all ocean depths. Most of them are found in tropical waters, but some of them go up into some colder waters, like New England and such. A few species even go up into rivers, into fresh water, and bull sharks are one of those species. And that's a bull shark, with some remora trailing along. Some are restricted to deep water, like the six-gill shark. So this shark only lives way down deep at the bottom of the ocean. Cookie cutter sharks also live down there. Goblin sharks. Okay, ecological and economic importance. Here we go again. We have, for all of our different phyla, we have to discuss that for some of these guys. And specifically here we're talking about the blue shark. So this is a blue shark. They're kind of like coyotes. I don't know, they hunt in packs, and they will go through feeding frenzies, and they'll attack, and they'll just eat so much that they throw up and they'll just keep attacking. As long as there's food to eat, they'll just keep eating. It's called a feeding frenzy. You may have heard of that term before. But they often only eat the weak and the sick, just like other land, just like land animals. And of course, we know that people eat shark. You can go to the store, any store that sells fish, and there'll be some shark there, okay, in one form or another. And of course, sharks are used in aquariums, but they typically raise them nowadays. Things have gotten better, but the shark populations have been decimated. People still use products for sharks. There's shark liver oil in Preparation H, for example. There's shark liver oil pills that people can take to treat leukemia and other cancers, or at least they think that it will treat them. Shark fins. Sharks are captured with nets or long lines with hooks, and they'll be brought up on shore on the boat, and the fins will just get cut off, and they throw the shark alive back into the water again. It is horrible. So if you ever have access to any shark fin stuff, you need to speak up, because this is extremely wasteful, irresponsible, and obviously hurtful and deadly to the organisms that we're dealing with. The shark populations have been diminished by over 90% in the world's oceans. And you know about keystone species. If you remove something, everything across the ecological food web is going to be disrupted, including us. So we can't keep doing this and wasting our being bad stewards to the environment. And people also collect sharks for using their cartilage to use for treating cancer. But again, this is not science. This is just based on, it might do it, There's no FDA backup for this type of use. So all of these causes have caused that decline in number of sharks, okay? So they're getting a visit by a wildlife officer because they didn't follow regulations. If you're fishing, which is hunting for sharks, you have to follow all the regulations that are involved, including size, and if you catch one that's not the right size, you got to throw it back. And so they're trying to, at least in the United States, they're trying to help the shark population come back because you know how important they are. Third world countries, they don't care. It's kind of sad. So now moving on from cartilaginous, chondrichthyes, to bony fish, osteichthyes. Anything with oste in front of it or ost refers to bone. So they have a skeleton that's at least partially made of bone to be considered an osteichthyes. There's about 2,100 species, but more every time they go down there and search. 98% of all fish and over about a half of all vertebrates on the planet are bony fish, osteichthyes. Here's a coelacanth, an organism that they thought was once extinct, a fish from way back in dinosaur times, that they just found living off the coast of Madagascar a few years back. So those species somehow survived. Like I said, more species are discovered each year. For example, the gold-speckled red-striped goby, and this new species of rat-tail fish that was discovered in the western Mediterranean, a new species of scorpion fish found in the Indo-Pacific area. So all of these fish were discovered in 2004, but that's old information. So since then, you can obviously assume that there's been so many more. So fish have scales. They don't have denticles like the shark scales. They're a little different, so you have to jot these down, quickly sketch these in your notes. These are cycloid, cycle, like circle, okay? And lionfish would have those kinds of scales. And these kinds of fish, like perch and paradise fish, they have ctenoid, you don't pronounce the C, it's like cnidarian, scales. So quickly sketch that. Looks like a little clam shell or scallop shell. Same here. Quickly just sketch that into your notes. 10 seconds on that. Take a mental picture, just real quick sketch, nothing too artistic. Okay, and the scales are covered by a thin layer of tissue and mucus. I discussed this with you guys before when I talked about the handprint of fungus on a fish. If you are a poor angler and you're not using proper handling, like wetting your hands first, you can peel off this layer of mucus and expose the fish's skin to attack by microbes, okay? They have a flap of bony, often sharp, I've been cut before by this anatomical feature of a bony fish, called an operculum. It covers their gills. Remember, the gills are very sensitive. Often the first things that get hurt in a fish when you catch a fish or when a fish is in a fight or whatever, because they're very sensitive. And that's why they have this very sharp, hard covering over their gills called an operculum. They have caudal lobes of different shapes, lunate, and such, so that, and their lobes are almost always the same size, unlike a shark. Sharks' lobes can be, their caudal fins can have different lengths, but in bony fish, they're typically the same. And you can use these features to dichotomous key identify organisms that are unknown to you. And the fins have, all our fins, whether they're the caudal fins or dorsal or pectoral, they have these things called rays. And in some species, they're poisonous, like in lionfish. But they are bony spines with thin membranes of skin in between. And of course, that's what gives them their thrust and when they swim around. Most have a terminal mouth. Remember that chondrichthyes have a ventral mouth underneath. Bony fish typically have a mouth on the end of their head. Terminal, end. Terminal means end. Sheepshead fish, blue marlin. So this is an external anatomy of a bony fish. So coupled with the chondrichthyes and the osteichthyes, these are the two diagrams, just simple like that you're going to make. And you can pick your species as long as it's Florida specific, okay? Now, bony fish have teeth fused to the jaw, very different than chondrichthyes. So here is a marine fish from South Australia. Would not want to get caught by either one of these guys. That's barracuda. We have those here, very common in Florida. I've seen these lots of times. They're only sharp on the point, but they also have sides like a double-edged knife. So remember never to wear anything shiny when you're swimming around on the beaches in Florida. They have a swim bladder. Sharks don't have a swim bladder. Remember, sharks had to move forward with their fins to provide lift, which I don't know if we talked about that just yet. We said that they've moved forward. We'll talk about that later. Sharks don't have a swim bladder. Bony fish do. Osteichthyes do. Here's a fish that was pulled up out of the deep water too fast, and its swim bladder was unable to compensate for the change in pressure, and so it expanded and actually came out of its mouth. And it's all for buoyancy. It's all to keep the fish from either floating to the top or sinking to the bottom. That's why fish seemingly just seem to float sometimes in the water, because they have a swim bladder right there. It goes along their spine above their intestines. So the one fish that we have to discuss the ecological and economic importance of is something called a Peruvian anchoveta, or otherwise known as an anchovy. So again, what do you see here? What looks similar in this picture to the krill picture that I showed you with the arthropods? And if you're thinking keystone species, it is. This many different chains in the web depend upon this species. So if it is overfished, and you can see this is annual catch, it varies. And so people are eating these, people are over harvesting these, and it can affect all the other species involved in that chain, okay, in that food web. Another example of a bony fish besides the Peruvian anchoveta that's the one that the book describes you have to know about, but the general consensus for all fisheries management is control, because otherwise rogue countries will just empty the ocean, or rogue fishermen from the United States of America will just empty the ocean of fish. So here is the collapse of the Atlantic cod. And so you could see fishing numbers, because technology got greater. This is in tons, 800,000 tons. Eventually, you can't keep taking without something happening. So the entire industry depleted to virtually nothing in 1992. So we have to be sure that we're being good stewards of our resources. So for ecological, the anchovies are food for larger fishes, and their excretions provide nitrates for the basis of the food chain. Economically, food for human consumption, bait for fishes, feed for farmed animals, very similar to the krill story, okay? Creates jobs and empowers local communities when done right. So here are fishermen just pulling tuna. They just throw a line in, it's shiny, the tuna say, ooh, yummy, and they bite it, and they just pull them in, they pretty much throw them over their shoulder. They land in the boat, and they put the line back in again. They're just pulling fish out one by one all day long. Okay, so ichthyology. I took a course in college called Marine Ichthyology. It was a graduate course, which means students who are going for their master's degree or higher, but I was the only one in that class. I got special permission to take it as an undergraduate. It was one of my favorite classes I had ever taken because it was very interesting. Ichthyology is the biology of fishes. And there's marine ichthyology and there's freshwater ichthyology as well. So body shape. Fish are streamlined. Okay. Well, they can be streamlined, typically. And any streamlined fish is built for speed. They're fast swimmers. So barracuda, mackerel, They're very similar shape. Tuna. For the fastest fish in the sea are tuna fish. It's called fusiform, like an airplane fuselage, so that air can pass over very easily without much resistance. Well, the fish are shaped the same way. Then there are fish that are not fusiform or streamlined. They are laterally compressed. And these fish are made for leisurely swimming through reefs or kelp beds. And so you've got yellowtail snapper, a damselfish. They have a different body shape. Then you have the elongated body shape, narrow for hiding in rocks and coral crevices or dense vegetation. So you have moray eels, trumpet fish, pipefish. I actually saw a trumpet fish on the Deerfield Beach live feed just this week. It's pretty cool. Swam right in front of the camera. And here's some cross sections. So just what their body shapes look like if you were to take a cross section. Okay. Feeding. Yes, we have different kinds of animals, just like we do on land. We know the word carnivore, so we're not going to spend too much time here, but we know great white sharks. We know about barracuda. And then we have grazers. They feed primarily on seaweeds and plants. I'm going to throw you for a little loop with that picture. Have you ever seen Shark Tale? Such a good movie with Will Smith. Anyway, this shark wants to be a vegetarian. It's pretty funny, actually. You should watch it if you haven't. Parrotfish, we talked about parrotfish, and when they bite on corals, okay? So they're still kind of carnivores, but their behavior is not hunting, but just grazing, like a cow would graze. And then we have filter feeders, which we've talked about those a little bit before when we talked about invertebrates, but even some vertebrates can be filter feeders, like a herring. Some of you have families that eat herring. I don't particularly like it, but they use these rakers in their gills. The water comes in and the rakers filter out food particles. The water leaves and they swallow the food. Okay, just like a whale, really. Same process, just with a different analogous structure in their body. And even something called a megamouth shark. Okay, one of 3 species of filter feeding sharks. Basking shark and whale shark also do that. So they just pull food in, swallow it, and then the water comes out the gills. Very odd looking creature, ancient looking creature. So digestion, they have pyloric ceci. That's how you say that word, pyloric ceci. These are slender, blind tubes located at the anterior. Anterior means head end. Posterior means rear end, okay? So at the anterior end of the intestine, that secrete enzymes. Just like in our body, we have like the pancreas, for example, that secretes certain things for digestion, and found in most bony fishes. Now, cartilaginous fish can drink these. They have something called a spiral valve. That's an artist's rendition. I know it's kind of fuzzy, but you can see that it spirals down, okay? And this is a dissection view of the spiral valve that increases the surface area of their intestines so that they have a more efficient way of digesting their food, okay? Respiratory system, we know that they have gills. The gills lie in the pharynx, which is part of the throat. We have a pharynx also, just behind the mouth. So you open the mouth and you could see right out the body, right out of the head through the gills. And most sharks have 5 slits on each side. Only that 6-gill shark that lives down deep in the ocean has 6 gills. They have to be irrigated by water. So the water must flow over them. Here are the different parts of the gills. Gill arches. These are the gill arches. And gill rakers, we talked about before. Each row has gill filaments. okay? And in those filaments are capillaries where oxygen and carbon dioxide gas exchanges with the water that's passing through them. Very similar to how our lungs work, but our lungs are more internal and protected, and we're getting oxygen from the air. It's dissolved in the air. It's part of the air we breathe. Fish, this is a misconception with some people, so pay very close attention. Fish will take in the oxygen that's dissolved in the water. We talked about oxygen dissolving and gases dissolving in an earlier unit in this class. Some people seem to think that they oxygen from H2O, like they take the oxygen out of the water molecule. Please don't think that, okay? It's the dissolved gases where they're getting this gas diffusion through the very thin capillary walls, okay? All right. Cartilaginous fishes, they open and close their mouth to force water over the gills. They have to do that in order to breathe. Moving on. First pair of gill slits is modified into spiracles. So, in these in species that can sit and not have to move forward. Okay, so a dogfish, a nurse shark, they have this spiracle here. That's why they can sit on the bottom and just open and close their mouth and not have to swim forward like many other species. Even when the mouth is buried in sand, they can still pull in water from here and pass it out through their gills. It's almost like a dolphin's blowhole on their head, except dolphins breathe air. Now, bony fishes have a more efficient system. They have one slit, they don't have 5. On each side, remember, covered by the operculum. We know this already. This is old news. And they have the same gill filament, gill rakers, and in water goes in, passes over the gills, the gas exchanges, oxygen goes in, carbon dioxide goes out through the water from both sides. They have a nervous system with olfactory sacs. They actually have nostrils on the top of their head, between their eyes and their mouth. Depending upon the species, the nostrils, will be in a little bit different places along here. But here's a tarpon, big fish with great big scales. Hunters, they are all over the waters here off of Boca and all over Florida. They have taste buds. They're able to detect chemical stimuli. You know that you've heard that sharks can detect blood in the water, like a drop of blood, like from very far away. So they use multiple things. We're going to talk about some of those right now. Some fish have barbels, like this goatfish, and they'll go on the bottom and they'll use their barbels on the bottom to actually taste what's there, and if they find something good, they'll bite it and they'll eat it. It's pretty wild. Nurse shark has little barbels, whisker-like organs near their mouth. Vision is used more in bony fish than in cartilaginous fish, so more in Osteichthyes than Chondrichthyes. These are just some bony fish eyes, some Osteichthyes eyes. They come in all different wonderful variations. Puffer fish. Some sharks have a nictitating membrane right there. It's like an eyelid, okay? But it goes underneath and it protects them from when they're cats and dogs, anything that pretty much bites with its mouth, kills with its mouth, they have to protect their eyes. So they have this protective membrane, kind of like an eyelid, but not quite, that covers over their eye. And eyes are very similar to other vertebrate organisms. Unique sense organ called a lateral line in snook. We have lots of these here in Florida. It's very highly visible. There's a clear black line, but in other fish it's not quite so visible. But all fish have it, and it can detect vibrations in the water, even possibly electrical stimulation. It allows them to avoid obstacles. You know that the water is not always crystal clear. So oftentimes they're swimming through murky water. But if something moves over there, they can detect it with their lateral line sensor strip, and they can move. That's how also fish school, using their lateral lines. The ampullae of Lorenzini. Yes, you heard that correctly. Say it with me. The ampullae of Lorenzini. And that are these little pores. This is the shark's ventral side, the mouth going towards the nose, okay? And you can see the breakdown of the anatomy of it. The surface pore, a canal filled with jelly, a sensory cell with hairs that are attached to nerves that help them locate prey and navigate. And they also can detect weak electrical fields as well. Ampullae of Lorenzini. Apparently some dude named Lorenzini found these ampullae and named them. They have inner ears that can perceive sound waves, sets of fluid-filled sacs called that have sensory cells. Now, a fish knows up from down. You never typically see a fish swimming upside down. Well, how do they know up from down? There's these things called otoliths. Lith means stone, so these are ear stones, and they develop inside the inner ear. And you can also, if you catch an organism and you dissect it, you can tell how old the fish is by just like the rings of a tree. Okay, and so you can count. These dots are placed there by people. As reference. So you can count how many, and you're supposed to answer this in your notes, how old these two fish are based upon the number of rings. So quickly count the number of rings for each one and get that answer down. Coloration. Fish have chromatophores, just like in that very neat flashing cephalopod we saw earlier, the cuttlefish, in the last set of notes. Skin cell pigments that when they expand and contract, the color can change. This is an actual picture of a flounder. They tested the abilities of these chromatophores, and the fish doesn't even have to think about it. It just happens. Whatever situation, whatever they're on, the chromatophores, their nervous system detects the surroundings and contracts or expands in certain areas to provide camouflage for that animal. It's amazing. That's just miraculous. They have structural colors. So these are iridophores, so they're kind of like chromatophores, but they're iridescent. That's where irido comes from. Like you've seen iridescent fabrics or iridescent car paint, where you look at a car in one angle and it looks purple, and then you look at a car from another angle and it looks green. That's iridescence. And that's what a lot of fish have on their scales as well. They reflect only certain colors of wavelength depending upon the angle that you're looking at. They have crystals in the skin that act like tiny mirrors. Again, just amazing. Coloration can also be a warning of a fish's toxicity. So, we know that lionfish, an invasive species here in Florida, have very bright colors and stripes, kind of a warning. Say, look at me, I'm dressed like a clown. If you come near me, I'm gonna hurt you, because clowns hurt people. It's true. I'm just kidding, I'm not afraid of clowns. And the stonefish, oh man, people step on those things, highly toxic spines. Disruptive coloration, so just like terrestrial animals, or if you're wearing army military fatigues like camouflage, it's the same thing. They have bars and stripes and spots that help break up their outline and enable them to be less visible. Counter shading. Again, terrestrial organisms have this as well. Birds, for example, will be light on the bottom and dark on top to prevent attack, or to try to prevent attack. That's why sharks are light on the bottom, dark on top. Barracuda, all these fish, light on the bottom, dark on top, counter shading. So if you look at a fish from below, it'll blend into the light sky above. Okay? Locomotion. They have muscles in their, this is what you eat. This is like the filleted fish that you eat at the restaurant or when you buy and you bring home. And they have these bands of muscle called myomeres, and they provide that really fast thrusting movement that propels a fish forward. I mean, you could just be swimming really calm and then go like this in the water, and the fish will just bolt fast, super fast. And that's what does it, those bands of muscle. The dorsal and anal fins are used as rudders to provide stability. So sharks, this is what I mentioned before, I told you we were going to cover it later. They have these pectoral fins, and they kind of just glide through the water. Their tail provides the thrust, and then the lift is provided, just like an airplane's wing, by their pectoral fins. And they have to keep swimming to push that water through their mouth and out through their gills, right? Remember, they don't have a swim bladder, chondrichthyes. So they have to move through the water somehow. Otherwise, they would sink. If they stopped swimming, they would sink. It's like if an airplane turns its engines off, it's going to sink, descend. Behavior. These fish are amazing. They're called sarcastic fringe heads. So they will be territorial, some more than others. Here's a smaller fish chasing away a rooster fish. They don't always necessarily fight, but it's very similar to, again, comparing to land organisms, which you may be familiar to. They will put on a good show. Your bark is worse than your bite for territorial reasons. But they typically don't fight, because fighting can damage them or kill them. And so if they can scare somebody away without fighting, then they're going to do that. Schooling is a well-defined behavior for protection, swimming, efficiency, hunting efficiency, and ease of mating. When you're in a school with a whole bunch of your own, then it's easier to find a mate, okay, than it is if you're off on your own. Plus the whole protective factor, like this. So approximately 4,000 species of fish school. Some of the largest schools can be 4,580 million cubic meters in width, in size. And so you can see they're all using their lateral lines to stay in formation, and you've got these predators who are waiting for a weak fish or someone to step out of line, and then one of them swims right through. That's just so cool. And they just part. You could do this snorkeling right off of the coast here. If you're swimming with the fish, and you don't only have to be in 5 feet of water. It doesn't have to be that deep. And you'll have a school of fish, and you can swim right through them, and they'll all swim part ways. I just did it over the summer here. Fish migrate, just like birds and terrestrial animals migrate. Fish migrate too. We know what migration is. It's mass movement from one location to another for environmental or food or mating, okay? These are salmon. We know that salmon start their lives off in fresh water, then they move to salt water, and then they come back again. So they migrate. Reasons, again, I said, food, climate, or not climate change, but seasonal changes and reproduction. There are anadromous fish, which I think we're going to talk more about in the second semester. So don't be too concerned about that word right now, but you still have to write it down. These are species that migrate from salt water to fresh water. Like I said, salmon and sturgeon. Anadromous. The opposite of that is catadromous. Just like if you take in chemistry, cations and anions, okay? They will have an opposite pattern. They will go from fresh water excuse me, to salt water. Yeah. Okay. So the American eel and striped bass will do that. Reproductive and life history. So cartilaginous fish have a cloaca. It is a multi-port, meaning birds and reptiles have this too. They don't have separate holes for the vagina or the urine, urethra, or anus. Okay, they're all got one. They're all one hole. That's it. That's called a cloaca. It opens to the outside through the anus, so everything comes out once. It's a multi-purpose hole. Now, jawless fish and bony fish, that was chondrichthyes. Osteichthyes and jawless fish have a separate opening for urine and gametes. So, and it's located just behind the anus. So they have a urogenital opening. Urogenital opening. A few marine fish are hermaphrodites, just like some invertebrate species. They have both male and female gonads, and they're able to fertilize their own eggs, which is kind of rare. Now, there is a variation of this called sex reversal in certain species of fish. Males will eventually change into females or vice versa. So the sea bass can do this, the clownfish, the grouper can do this. The clownfish particularly is interesting. If they're mating and the female dies, the male will turn into a female. And that puts a great big spin on Finding Nemo, because Nemo's dad should have been turned into a female, but little kids probably wouldn't get that very well, right? Reproductive behavior. So the first step, obviously, is courtship. So a series of behaviors that attract males. These are two triggerfish. Triggerfish? Yeah. These are mandarin gobies. They're pretty neat fish. They're beautiful fish. You see the coloration on those, okay? Here is parrotfish, male and female. So we've got external and internal fertilization patterns. Both can happen depending upon what species we're talking about. Copulation is internal fertilization. Shouldn't have to go much further with that picture there, okay? And external would be the female lays the eggs and the male puts the sperm on the eggs outside. Now, male sharks copulate with these copulatory organs called claspers. So you can tell a male shark from a female shark by these claspers. They are not the penis. Don't confuse that with the penis. These are just things that help the sperm get into the female, okay? Claspers. Spawning, external fertilization, we talked about that when we talked about sponges and cnidarians like corals, where they will just release the sperm and egg into the water. So here are fish doing that. This is fish, these are fish spawning, and you can see that they're just releasing the clouds of sperm and egg and mixing them together so that they find each other. Now, we're almost done with our notes, and this ends our discussion on reproduction. So we've got oviparous and ovoviviparous. Oviparous are fish that spawn eggs. Anything with O, by the way, is egg, okay? Ovoviviparous, so we've got that vi, that means alive, fish that give birth to live young. Most are cartilaginous. Here's a baby shark being born. Ovoviviparous. And here is viviparous. So like ovoviviparous, so you're going to have to work out when you're studying the difference between these three terms. These absorb nutrients from the mother's wall of the womb just like mammals do. And this blenny does that, a viviparous blenny. Here's the last slide. Some sharks, such as the horn shark, lay eggs and young shark hatches out, okay? Great whites give birth to live, fully developed. Other species, like the sand tiger and whale, the baby sharks hatch from the egg inside the mother before being born. and the mothers do not care for them. None of them, none of these, the mothers care for them. And in some species, like the sand tiger shark here, the fittest pup will eat its siblings inside before they even hatch to increase its own chances of survival. So imagine you and your twin are inside your parent and you eat your twin inside the parent. The stronger twin eats the other twin. How disgusting is that? So you have a question at the end where you have to choose one of these scenarios and explain why you chose it as your favorite. And that ends our notes for fishes.